Would you like to know more? So, here we are on the character. My inventory is a little messy. Sorry about that. The way the build works is pretty simple. We get Unearth to 100 mana. As you can see, I have it exact here. One of the best ways to maintain that is with the inspiration support in our endgame setup. We'll get to that in a little bit. As you can see, our helmet is Kitava's Thirst. It's got a +2 Fire Gems corruption. Good corruption. You don't need +4 though. It's good, but for how expensive it's going to be, don't get scammed and overinvest. And our primary gem is Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction. It's hooked up to Hypothermia, Awaken Fire Penetration, and Combustion. And these three things together give it decent enough damage where the rate at which we're triggering it more or less makes up for the missing links. Now, casting a skill for 100 mana and making it trigger is pretty simple. We're using Unearth. Unearth has a base cast time of 0.3. So when we spin up a bit, it gets to a pretty quick cast time pretty quickly. It's already under, or rather over 10 casts a second after just that little bit. That also applies to our attack speed, which makes our shield charges pretty good. Either way, that's the gist of how all of the mechanics come together to make the build go. And basically, it's just kind of a happy merriment of Unearth being a very fast spell, kind of making it one of the best delivery systems for Kitava's Thirst, and then Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction being a fantastic skill in and of itself for making use of this, because it wants as many corpses as possible if you're casting it over and over again. How we manage the mana cost is a bit of another story, especially when you start out. I have the POB here. It's very well detailed. It has all the information that you need in it to get the build up and running. And basically all the information you need for as you're reaching certain leveling breakpoints. If you go to skills, it's got various setups. It says check notes if you have questions. It's got your level 50 Unearth links, your alternate setup for before you get Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction, the endgame setup that I use, and also multiple gear sets to look at. Right now, we're going to look at the level 50 gear setup so that you know when you get it up and running, and that's around level 50. Technically, Kitava's Thirst is available at level 44, so it's possible to do it then, but level 50 I find is when it's good to switch. You want the Ley Lines, Ether Wind, Nexus Gloves base as your gloves early on in the game. This is important because it gives you a chance to refund your mana, and these are relatively cheap and easy to get. Thanks to Necropolis League, not necessarily Necropolis, but the changes they made to the campaign, Ritual is now available as like a one-time event in Act 2. You can rerun that if you want, but more importantly, other people are going to be running it if you're in trade, and that means you could get Leyline gloves early enough for it to matter. And that makes things much smoother. If you don't have these, it's actually still fine. You can still level with Kitava's Thirst. You're going to be leaning on your mana flask a little more, but you kind of do so much, and you're basically already on a 6-link early, so it feels good regardless. Now, we've lost some things due to, now we've taken some nerfs, basically due to how Unearth's corpse scaling was changed, and also how Desecrate no longer has access to the Spectre Pool. The Spectre Pool one is bigger in the sense that going after Ubers really isn't something you're going to do on this build anymore. I managed to do it last league, and if I had invested a bit more gear, I think it even would have been comfortable. I don't know that that's going to be an option anymore, but there's no telling what's going to be available in the Kalguur League, especially with some of the new special crafts that are coming, if there's going to be something that makes up the difference. Additionally, the Unearth scaling is a little weird. What you'll notice with the skill is levels after level 20 only give 1 corpse level, and it's very, very possible that now that there is much bigger separation between level 20 and level 86 corpses, that number has increased. And if they've changed it so that you get 2 corpse levels per gem level, sorry, it's a mouthful, 2 corpse levels per level of the gem increasing after 20, it's just not going to sound anything but complicated, is it? Anyways, if you get those levels, you might get 2 corpse levels per, and if that's happening, big if, sure, getting back up to 86 corpses again is possible, which would mean no nerf. With the investment I have currently, you'd get back up to 82, which would pretty much feel like no nerf, if I'm being perfectly honest. That said, right over here, over there, yeah, that way, I've got footage going from a test that I did. That's with a level 1 Unearth and with 200% damage removed from the character. And it still clears T16s just fine. You are going to be stronger than that, for sure. Maybe not defensively, because the defenses are still very well tuned there. But you're going to be stronger than that DPS-wise, for sure, at the start of the league with kind of junky gear. That's the truth of it. And one of the big reasons for that is I don't even use the Desecrate brand, and the Desecrate brand is still going to be a big single target boost for this build specifically. How the defenses work is rather simple. We have Mistress of Sacrifice and a trigger on our offerings. The trigger weapon, you can see here, kind of a rather easy weapon to make happen, even here on an Oscillating Scepter base. I basically had to get minion damage and +1 to all physical or +1 all in general, isolated as prefixes, and then a multi-mod craft, which costs a little bit of money, but it's not complicated to do. It's easy. You get this set up, you do your multi-mod craft, you put cast speed on, you put the trigger craft, and the trigger craft puts everything in this weapon, and every 8 seconds, they're going to cast. And for Bone Offering, that's 100% uptime. For your curses, that's enough uptime to blow up the enemies that you need to. I also use Wave of Conviction earlier before everything is set up because we don't have Whispers of Doom right away. And there's actually a reason for that. You don't want Whispers of Doom right away. You actually want Sanctuary of Thought to be anointed early on in your character. And we're going to talk about that next because the defensive layers are many in Path of Exile these days. And these defensive layers are all very important to the build feeling good. The reason Sanctum of Thought gets anointed early is because you want to stack reduced extra damage of critical strikes taken. As you can see, I have it here on the shield. That's kind of a mandatory suffix. The shield is a very rigid item in this build as far as you need some spell block and you need that reduced extra damage from critical strikes. Those two things are very, very important. But I think the need for spell block has gotten a little more lax in the new patch. You can see I'm actually over a little bit, so that frees up a little bit of room because it doesn't need to be quite as rigid. What you do for damage or on the other stats of the shield is kind of dealer's choice. You could lean towards more armor, you could lean towards the big life roll like I did here. Generally, you're probably going to need a resistance in that extra suffix slot. It's a very important item for you. So, the actual defenses of this build come from recoup, mana, life, obviously life, but honestly, this build has over 5k life, which is almost a little strange these days because diversifying instead of just having a lot of life is usually much better. But anyways, energy shield, mana, life, we have all of those. We have 2k ES, 2k mana, mind over matter, life. We have armor, 20,000 in this version of the tree. That number is going up though because our bases are getting better. Some of the things are tweaked on the tree as well, so that's why this looks a little lower. If I actually had it parodied in here, you'd see I've got 23.6k, and with my flask up, that's 34k, which is pretty good, especially in the mapping situation. The reason the number is a lot lower here right now, and I kind of am okay with that, is because what you see here on this chest, this body armor is now a very poor example of what you can get in the game. We are getting new bases that have much higher like base armor and energy shield levels, and additionally, quality is now multiplicative. And if that wasn't enough, the Gravicious craft is going away, but it's also coming back in the form of an Eldritch Implicit. So it's either going to take the place of that Determination effect or the Offering effect, which are losing those are things that we can very easily patch up in the build, so don't panic at all about that. What this means though, is we're going to keep that physical damage taken as mod from the Eldritch Implicit, in addition to getting 3 prefixes boosting our armor, like specifically. It's going to be huge. It's actually going to be huge. I've spec'd out of points on the tree. I would not be surprised if when it all shakes out, this POB with the updated gear and less nodes will have more armor than my character in the game and possibly better physical damage taken as modifiers. Because we don't know how good that's going to be, and I bet it's really going to be worth investing and trying to get the higher mods on that one. So we combine all of these defenses with some decent block, and very exciting, the actual buff to the build. Yes, this build got buffed in some ways. These nodes over here, which is what I replaced these with, these give us all maximum resistance. Additionally, this node now also gives all max res. So now we hit 79% rather easily. You could even come up here to do some alternative fixing to your chill or your shock and get another 1% there. You could also come down here and get either some regen or some life with some armor and get the mastery. That would give +1 all max res for having armor on every slot. Because we do have armor in every slot. That's a requirement of the build, thanks to this. This is actually a big part of why our armor value looks pretty good, even though the investment is super low. It's because we have these 2 points, which obviously give a little bit of armor, and then this mastery, which doubles the flat armor value we're getting from our body armor. That's a lot. That's a big increase, an absolutely colossal one. So we know how the build works now. let's talk about how we get it up and running. This is the level 50 tree. It's right here. It says start 2. I think technically it only requires level 48. It shows you what ascendancy you need and kind of the nodes you want to be taking so that you are in position to do the swap when the time comes. You can see we have the 10% chance to recover 10% mastery. Very important. You want to have that. And if possible, the gloves. Aetherwind would be best. You can have Leyline by this point if you're really pushing fast and you can't trade for it. Otherwise, you need to have the helmet, the mastery, and a good mana flask. A good mana flask is very important because, quite frankly, sustaining this early on is kind of impossible. 100 mana per cast is a tremendous amount right now. That's more than 10% of our total mana, as you can see here on the side. That's fine, though. It sounds like it's troublesome. The thing is, we're basically on a 6 link worth of damage at this point, so you are going to demolish content. Additionally, we have an alternate setup here for before you have the Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction. This uses Volatile Dead and Detonate Dead together with Combustion and Fire Penetration, and this is very nice early on because Volatile Dead orbs will go out and target things for you. You can preload a ton of them before a big enemy spawns, and it just makes things very cozy while leveling when there's a little bit of, counter coziness going on with the way managing your mana can be. But I assure you, you have way more damage than you need. Once you get all of this up and running, it's clean, it's smooth, you're going to feel good about it. The tree then updates to this kind of mapping start situation, and the mapping start kind of prioritizes getting the framework of the tree out, getting enough life, getting your block going, because a little bit of block early on is really rather nice. And most importantly, kind of setting up for your eventual Uber Ascendancy. Uber Ascendancy is when this build kind of goes to the moon. Swap these over. Uber Ascendancy is what pushes your block up. You don't need this, though. Like, you don't need that much survivability, because the build, even though it only shows like a little bit of life and a little bit of mana, it actually has a tremendously large raw HP pool for early on in the game. That's no joke. You have so much health. I don't know how else to put it. You have a lot. Once you have the framework up, you kind of go to the late game situation tree. The late game tree is when your recoup mixes in, you get your blocks capped, you have your resistance support kind of going on, and you start to feel really good about things, and you start to add in the bits and bobbles that maybe aren't so easy to get on day one, admittedly. Early on, in the tree currently, we have this Watcher's Eye. You really want that Clarity mod on a Watcher's Eye. That's going to be your first big improvement to the mana. But the Determination mod with it is like the key. That's what I prefer, generally speaking, until you get that. Because one of the important mods on our shield is reduced extra damage from critical strikes. Until you get that, you actually want to anoint Sanctum of Thought if possible. Just for the reduced extra damage taken from critical strikes. If there's another node on the tree that they've added that also does this, you could probably go for that. But reducing the extra damage of critical strikes is very important in this build, because what it does is it allows you to run through content, like mapping, bosses, etc., without ever getting surprise popped. And that kind of covers for the max hit situation, because when you can't get crit, the amount of max hit you need on a given skill goes way down, because that random one-shot crit no longer is a possibility. There's some other important endgame improvements that kind of start to push the damage in a much more aggressive way. For starters, you want to get a Oscillating Scepter. Oscillating Scepter gives you Elemental Overload, which gives you back these 3 skill points. When you get those 3 skill points back, you can put them elsewhere, which is very nice. As I go to the endgame example tree, that's the gear. Endgame example tree. You'll notice I have a Parandus Pact placeholder here. I'm pretty sure the current beta version of POB doesn't have this in here because they're changing the name of that jewel. They're changing the name of that jewel. It's going to become something having to do with King in the Mist, because he's going to be the new guy who drops it instead of that which was taken, which is fine because this is an amazing item. When it's placed here and it is coming back, this is worth about 102, 108, I can't remember exactly what, fire damage. That's a lot. That's a lot. That's a huge DPS improvement for the build. It's more valuable than a lot of other things you could be getting. Additionally, we eventually moved to a level 6 Unearth setup. You want to go for like a level 3 Corrupted Empower and Enhance first, because these are much cheaper. Everyone's hunting the level 4 version of these. So the level 3 Corrupted ones end up rather cheap because there's always a glut of them, even pretty early on in the league. If you can't have both of these by the end of the first week, you either don't have a lot of time to play, or I don't know. I actually don't know. They after a week, these are usually less than a div, or close to it. So I have great faith in everyone's ability, regardless of skill level, to make this happen. That said, getting to level 4 on both is very impactful, because this increases quality, which is corpse life on your unearth, and this increases levels, which is corpse level, which is corpse life on unearth. These are really the only other supports that do anything. So you kind of want to wait for these before switching to your 6th link. If you already have the 6th link, you can mix in other things just to get the mana cost balanced, because one of the other great things about the 6th link is inspiration comes into play. And you can raise the level, lower the level, and tweak the quality to get your mana cost as close to 100 as possible without going over. Like right now, for whatever reason, it's showing 84, and we can start taking levels away. Get it back up, right? There you go. Oops. There you go. Level 5 inspiration, 100 mana cost. And that's going to give you better mana efficiency. The final tool in the build, though, when it comes to that mana and getting everything going well, that's kind of a late game upgrade, is you want a proper essence crafted amulet. Yeah. The best way to do this is to get one with a fractured mod that's very desirable to you. I went with +1 to level of all physical skill gems for obvious reasons. That makes our unearth better. And what it does is it adds more chance to recover mana when we use a skill. It's exactly identical to the Mana Mastery, and if you have Clarity running, it's exactly identical to the Clarity Watcher's Eye mod. And when you have the 3 of these, you actually get to change your gloves to whatever you want, as long as it has armor and energy shield. And that's another big improvement, because you can get some very nice implicits on there. On these ones, I have minion damage, fire damage leeches life, and additionally, I have increased damage with hits against chilled enemies. And you're probably listening to that and like, we chill? Yes, because of the Quartz Pact, we chill, which is actually why our final lineup includes hypothermia. It's the best damage one that we can get. So assuming you get all of that, your damage is going to go up, 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 up. You're going to find it at that point, you're probably like more than capable of just smacking Maven and Uber Elder and getting your own voidstones if you want. It might be a little more difficult on hardcore, obviously, because you can't die, but you're playing on hardcore, so you know the game well enough. You're going to invest probably a little more heavily in defenses, and this build now has opportunities to go into certain defenses that it didn't before, very largely because of what's happening down here with these new all maximum elemental resistances nodes. We never had this. I'm so happy that we do. It's a massive improvement to the build, and it's going to cover some of the holes of losing DPS and bosses by virtue of just, well, you're not going to need as many portals, if any. And one of the other nice things about grabbing this is you can get Corrupting Blood cannot be inflicted on you, which also helps with Cyrus. So like all of the pinnacles are covered by this being added to the tree, for this build at least. As far as recoup is concerned, what you get from the tree is largely enough. There is also a Mana Mastery we pick up that gives 10% recouped as mana, and then you want to have the prefixes on your rings with 1 slot open and no crafts so that you can put the plus maximum mana damage taken recouped as mana craft on them. This comes from Betrayal. It's a very important craft for this build because when you have that extra bit of recoup, you have that extra bit of survivability to just kind of keep things from overwhelming you, right? As you take more damage, because so much of it is being taken not from mana, right? Only 40% of it is going to mana, and that's only happening after your energy shield. So they get through 2,000 points of energy shield and 3,000 points of life with some big hit, and then 22% of that comes back as mana. Your mana shoots back up. Like, it's almost the situation where as long as you don't have a dot on you doing a lot of damage, being under fire keeps your mana higher than if you were just casting without anything on you. Like, it increases your mana efficiency even though taking damage is supposed to remove mana. It's very cool that way. I'm a big fan of it. Some other things we get on the tree that may not be obvious at first but are rather very important. The Fire Mastery for hits against ignited enemies is very good on this build. We're running Combustion in our main damage link, which is giving us a flat chance to ignite, and we hit so often that this basically is applied instantly no matter what we're fighting, which is, I mean, it's just a tremendous amount of damage effect. As you can see, unallocating this one node would remove 10% of our DPS. Additionally, some extra fire exposure effect. That's really useful because at some point, you move away from using Wave of Conviction to Awaken Fire Penetration, which gives you that. And because we're hitting so often, 10% is plenty. And then, as you can see here, like the old setup, We have Flammability, Bone Offering, Wave of Conviction. That is when you switch to the Whispers of Doom anointment and you go down here to Elemental Weakness added on. So it's actually like a colossal amount of additional resistances being reduced on enemies. 67% and then another 15 or so, something like that, from the fire exposure. It's a lot. Enemies do not have a lot of resistances to our damage. We're getting a huge more multiplier, kind of stacking into the fact that we have to work around having Kitava's Thirst. And then we have some other masteries that come into play that are kind of important and shouldn't be slept on. Increased effective offerings is block chance. Don't sleep on that. One point for 7% block and 5% spell block is no joke. Additionally, we keep life modifiers as far away from our armor as possible so that we can get this mastery. And that's still going to be worth it even after the new life modifiers that they add in the game, because in addition to getting better life modifiers in the game, we're also being offered much better armor modifiers that are much more valuable, honestly. We're probably going to have like a 3k armor like body base, I would say. Because we're going to have, yeah, triple modded, better quality. 3k armor on the body armor is probably very possible, even with the hybrid. And then, I don't know, 500 plus energy shield, hopefully. Going to be very nice. As for how our auras work, we're actually using Eternal Blessing, which is not the one that they removed. They removed Divine Blessing. Dodge that bullet. Eternal Blessing basically makes one aura free, but when you do that, you can't reserve for another aura. Or can you, right? Because we're using a Watcher's Eye with 2 auras, so how is that happening? Well, the funny thing about Eternal Blessing is you can only have one aura that reserves mana on you. You can still reserve life with an aura, which is a really cool little piece of tech. You can use that in a lot of places in this game, honestly. And basically what we do is we have Clarity hooked up to Arrogance, and that doesn't reserve much life because Clarity is a flat value. I have it level 2 right now. I'm not even sure why. It should probably just be level 1. It doesn't really matter. It's reserving like 100 flat life total, which is nothing. That's nothing compared to what we're getting from having the Watcher's Eye active. My voice is about to go. As you can hear, my voice is starting to go a little bit. I'm in a bit of suffering, so I'm going to try to wrap this up. The notes section in the POB is the all-star of this build guide. It has every question under the sun answered, and if that question is not answered, it has a nice little message down here talking about what you can do going forward. And also, I'm going to be streaming while I play the League, even though I won't be playing this build. You are more than welcome to come into the channel, Cardboard Bastards, right here on YouTube, and pick my brain about it. You can even message Winkers online. Hopefully I don't regret saying that and just ask me in person if I'm on. That's fine. I'm okay with that, unless I suddenly start getting swamped really badly. Which, I mean, if I get swamped really badly from the same question over and over again, I'll just make a video about it and it probably won't be an issue anymore. But yeah, there's information here. There's information on gearing. The going forward section talks about some things that I didn't talk about that you can use to push the build even a little higher. I don't recommend that anymore, though. I think getting this build in a position to kill Ubers seems a bit unrealistic. It might be achievable on the grounds of you could get it tanky enough where it's comfortable to fight them, and then at that point, having high DPS isn't as important. But largely, I wouldn't go towards that. There's a lot of talk about why I make certain decisions and why certain things are good. And I just want to say, for anyone who does try the build, if you make changes, please consider them. There's nothing in this build I do for no reason. It's been refined over several leagues, and very often I'll have people come in and tell me that they're dying a lot at endgame maps, and I'll be like, do you have crit damage reduction? And you have your recoup nodes, and it's usually one of those specifically that they've slept on, and they're getting in a situation either where an enemy pops them, or they just can't deal with sustained damage, and recoup really does deal with the sustained damage. So anyway, that's the build. Just for fun, I'm gonna go ahead and load up the ultra garbage mode version of the build, where I have a level 1 unearth and a downscaled inspiration for mana cost issues. I go ahead and I take out Parandus Pact, removing a ton of fire damage, and then even the fire damage mastery. We run into a silo. Everyone hates this map anyways. And yeah, even with nothing, like next to nothing rather, the build's damage is kind of okay. This is probably going to be very painful, admittedly. Ooh. This is a bit more painful, admittedly, but even that, like, the damage I have right now, it's important to state, is worse than what you will have with trash gear at at T16 maps when you like first get there. It's worse, genuinely worse. So I don't want there to be any concerns that the build isn't going to perform as a general mapper, because that is the most important thing. You want your league start to clear T16s efficiently, to get you your voidstones, and most importantly, you want it to be able to farm the next build, because if you want to kill Ubers, this was never going to be the build for it. It kind of had a little bit of that in it last league, but only just barely. I think there were better versions of playing Detonate Dead for that, and I think that's still the case. I believe someone out there has an Archmage Detonate Dead cooking up. I don't know if that's a Hierophant build or not. If it's not, you could probably transition this character into it. There's a million other Witch builds you could transition into it, and to be perfectly honest, you're going to have a very easy time farming the currency to get it all. And this build has such a broad spectrum defensive setup that honestly, you're going to have a good time with the League mechanic. Like, I can say that with confidence because there's really nothing in the game the League mechanic can throw at you that's going to feel awkward for this build. Anyway, hopefully that little preview did something to assuage any concerns you might have, because the build did take a nerf, but even with our damage just absolutely neutered by the removal of some very important things, we're probably doing like maybe less than half of the damage you're going to be expecting when you arrive at T16s in the league for Kalguur. Actually that much less, and it still clears just fine. It's going to feel a lot better, especially those single target situations. I didn't allow myself to use Arcanist Brand in any of those situations either, which that's going to be a big improvement also. The build's going to be perfectly strong. I'm here for any questions, comments, and concerns. I hope if you play it, you enjoy it a whole lot. If you don't, again, don't be afraid to ask me. I will help get it fixed for you, because I've played this build enough to say there is nothing in the game they have done that has made it a bad league start choice. But it is a league start choice. They've definitely pushed it back into the you want to league start this build and possibly move on. If as far as you go in the game is 4 voidstones, this is a good enough build to do it, right? If like that's your league goal, which I know that's the goal for a lot of people, it's going to get it done. So I hope you consider it. At the very least, I hope you enjoyed the build guide, and maybe some of the tactics I use to make this character strong are going to inspire you elsewhere. That's great as well. Happy to hear about that. And have a good one, Exiles. See you on Friday in Settlers of Kalguur.